Hello and welcome to Research Methods, Tools, and Funding, a primer for humanities undergraduates. This is made for the Office of Fellowships at Northwestern University. Hello, I'm Ben. I am the Office of Fellowships Graduate Assistant for 2021 to 2022. I'm a doctoral candidate in the musicology program here at Northwestern in the Beanan School of Music. And before that, I studied English literature at Haverford College. I've dedicated a lot of time and energy over the years to the pursuit of research, teaching, and advising in the humanities. As for why I am making this, uh, producing a presentation relevant to the sort of interest in research of the graduate assistant each year is within the responsibilities of this role, and this is a topic that I have thought a lot about. Um, I found that a lot of humanities undergraduates, like myself with my English BA from 2014, I've often get really excited or really captivated by specific topics, but might not be very aware of which research methods and tools are available to them to pursue that. So as a component of my role as a graduate assistant in Office of Fellowships, this has sort of emerged and grown from my time doing intake interviews and other sorts of advising for grants and fellowships, internal funding, external funding in different ways at Northwestern. Two big things that I have found in my time talking to students is that one, how scholars go about big research projects can feel really mysterious, and two, how people find funding to support these projects, especially if you're not in STEM, can feel even more mysterious. So this guide seeks to demystify these processes, the process of gaining research experience, doing research, and finding funding to support your research. And again, this is very specifically targeting humanities students, any sort of humanities pursuits. However, there's no one-stop shop at Northwestern for how to find which resources are available to you, whether that be learning how to do research or finding funding for research. And frankly, I know it could be a bit overwhelming seeing the sort of huge assortment of different offices and specific funding sources that are advertised to you, perhaps. So given the maybe difficulty in navigating this decentralized research grants across non-academic offices, departments, think of this as a primer that might point you into some of the correct directions. Of course, also reaching out to any of the offices that I mention within this presentation is a good place as well. And I will probably say this a couple more times, but everything that I'm talking about here will also be in a link below in some form, more or less a script of what I'm talking about with lots of links, and check this out too, sort of suggestions. So while working in the Office of Fellowships, one of my specific projects was indexing every sort of funding resource that I could find that was available to undergrads. And I started using this towards advising, doing intake meetings, and that led me to this presentation. So I've kind of already mentioned this, but who is this for? Specifically humanities undergraduates, but of any field within humanities and of any year of study. To that, you might be starting a research project yourself, seeking methods and tools to conduct research, ideas about where should I look next, or if you're looking for guidance about finding and applying to research funding of some sort. But that all said, this is a primer, not an exhaustive guide. I'm not talking about everything that's available, but hopefully this will give you the tools to then take the next steps. So the plan for this talk, and I will leave timestamps in the video here if you want to just jump to a particular section. I fear this might be a little bit long, so hopefully that will give you the little bit more ease in navigating this presentation. So first, talking about methods for research. So actual research practices, how people go about the particular practice in terms of the kind of results that they're looking for. The two big things in addition to practices that I talk about are bracketing, so how to set like the actual scope of the project that you're pursuing, and thinking about outcomes. What are the goals? What is the output of your intended project? More on that in that section. Tools for research. Honestly, a lot of this is a particular piece of software or a tip that I think it could be really, really helpful based upon my own experience in coursework, in my dissertation work, and other kinds of research that I've conducted, and speaking to my peers, speaking to my colleagues as well. So trying to pull together resources, whether they be software or other, for finding things, so exploring resources in the world, collecting data, so actually collecting it itself, putting it down, and then crafting projects. So ways of either presenting that material, crafting that material in other ways towards meeting an audience. And then finally, the thing that's maybe much more specifically bringing it to the Office of Fellowships, funding. So the Office of Fellowships in particular can help with the second of these items here, the external, which is what this slide is here. So the external, so that would be national, regional competitions, things that you might have heard of, like Fulbright is under the purview of the Office of Fellowships here at Northwestern, as it is under similar sorts of offices, maybe organized differently at other universities. So that's external, things the Office of Fellowships can help you with are contrasted with internal, that being things offered by Northwestern for Northwestern students, but also faculty or postdocs, but really honing in on things available from Northwestern to Northwestern students and humanities students specifically. That's the little table of contents here. Select your time mark at this point, else we can carry on with methods. I'm going to continue to haunt you in the corner of a lot of these slides, but not all of them. I tried to be a little bit, I tried to restrain myself. So methods of research, I'm starting with a little bit of an abstract question here, which I think is important, even if I don't want it to sound patronizing, but I think we're starting from the foundations, thinking about this. And this is where we're arriving. So these are, again, this is not exhaustive, but here are 4 methods that you might use, or you probably will use more than one, perhaps, in the pursuit of research. But first, research broadly is the production of knowledge in service of a question about something in the world. And while in the setting of the university, you'll be asked to come up with novel research questions to make either new interpretations and or create projects that say something that has not been said before. So, and in order to know what's not been said before, you kind of have to situate that in some sort of discourse. You have to think about who else has talked about this issue and how is the way that you are approaching it different, or how could you say something different from based upon multiple sources, say, and synthesizing them together into something new. You have a lot of resource, and like I've said, I think in addition to, there's just kind of an overwhelming number of resources available to you in this setting, and I think it's a lot to work through and a lot to learn, especially arriving in the big university setting for the first time from high school, say. Northwestern especially is sort of what is known as a research university. You might have also heard it referred to as an R1 university. I won't go too far into what that means, but you can look up the Carnegie classification of institutions of higher education. That's their classification, R1. But basically what it means is that it has a deep prioritization of research here. So this is a highest level of commitment, R1, which means that they're spending a lot of money on conducting research, supporting research, and they're outputting a lot of research. This is only relevant here just to say that you're here. You're surrounded by faculty, graduate students like myself, and different offices, all dedicated to producing, conducting, and supporting cutting-edge research across disciplines. And you can really benefit from that, whether that be asking people questions or following any of the number of little pieces of advice I'm giving you here to take next steps towards learning more. Okay, but jumping right ahead, different methods of research, thinking about how to go about this, lend themselves to different pursuits of knowledge or different sorts of research questions better. So we have archival or artifactual, which would be sort of reading texts, looking at objects. Interview-based or say survey-based would be talking to people, hearing from people, whether that be individually, anonymously, in more of a group capacity, collecting a number of surveys. Participant observation and or ethnography. This is especially maybe used in anthropological pursuits or ethnomusicological pursuits, a little closer to my discipline. The idea being that you're integrating yourself into a community. You're engaging with individuals within your community, say. And in addition to your own observations, you are asking questions, perhaps also doing interviews, likely also doing interviews in that setting in order to synthesize some sort of a study of a cultural group or a group of people. And then finally, interpretation sounds really broad, and any of these other categories or any research project will use some sort of analysis, some sort of close reading, whether you are considering people, so beings, texts. We'll talk more about that. But that's always going to be present, in sort of making sense of qualitative and quantitative data using, say, historically informed context and theoretical models. So all under the auspices of interpretation analysis. From here, this has become sort of a pet project of mine that I find really help in my research, thinking about setting up the scope. And maybe you've already dived into a particular project. You already know the thing you're excited about. But at any stage, whether this is at the very beginning, middle, or even later on, we're thinking like, what's most important to like accentuate? How do I bring this to the next level? I think that considering the scope or how you bracket your project is really, really key. So I might I'll read these off and then you leave them all on the screen to consider. But at a basic level, do you want to study an object, an event, or a being? And of course, you can study multiple events, compare different individuals or different groups of people across time and space. But really honing in on like, what is the object of the study here? To that, is this a historical event? Is it a contemporary, ongoing thing? Actual or hypothetical? Food for thought. I thought that originally this was historical, contemporary, or hypothetical. But maybe that was a little bit too abstract. But I think that there are projects, say, in philosophy or in literary studies, where the things that you might be comparing are conceptual, though attached to something real, attached to something historical. So the actual versus hypothetical, I think, might be a question worth asking oneself. Depending upon whether you can study it personally and directly, or you're using the accounts and analyses of others, that will change the kinds of documents you're perhaps seeking out. Or if you are trying to situate a new document that you have found, how might you use the accounts of others, the histories written by other people, say scholars, in order to buttress your own case, in order to think about how this might change the telling of a particular story. And finally, outcome. So, and I mentioned this earlier, and I think this is really, really key, especially when thinking about grant writing, which is to say how you are justifying why you might need funds to continue to do research. Funding bodies, review committees care a great deal about why you're the right person for the job. So it's the skills that you possess and how you might use those skills in order to accomplish what you set out to, and being really clear about what you're setting out to accomplish and how you're going to do so. And the impact on the world piece is perhaps there's increasing care about how the why. Why are you pursuing this research? In what way do you feel that this is valuable? And oftentimes the reflective mode of thinking about your own positionality or an identity and the issues and values that you care about in the world and want to shed greater light on, want to to direct people's attention to, can be that answer. So all of these things in combination, I think, are a really robust way of setting up the scope, setting up the container in which the qualitative and quantitative research and your analysis will then be a part of. But if you're looking for like how to write an abstract, like think about the answers to each of these 4 questions and put that together. And that's kind of an abstract too. And that's what a lot of these granting committees are looking for, maybe a more robust or a built out abstract. On the topic of personally, directly, or using the accounts of others as one of those research methods, primary and secondary sources. Now, this is one of the topics that I have found that in conversations, so something I should have mentioned earlier is I also taught courses through my PhD program at Northwestern. The question of what is a primary source and what is a secondary source tends to be pretty sticky, and it tends to be pretty important, I would say, at the same level of what is a peer-reviewed source. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to focus on how these are discussed in humanities. In other disciplines, primary and secondary, those lines tend to shift a little bit. But for the sake of this exercise, for the sake of any of your humanities courses, a primary source is first-hand information and documentation. So if you're conducting an interview, you're producing a primary source if you're writing a transcript of that, say. A description of someone's experience of an event, if they were the person to experience that event, primary. Creative work is a primary source, letters, diaries, speeches. So these are the original materials, say, that research might be based on. Secondary sources, by contrast, are secondhand information. So they are secondhand sources are, or secondary sources rather, analyze something created by someone else. So when you're writing a paper that's analyzing a movie, you are producing something that is a secondary source. If you are citing someone's paper that is analyzing that movie, you are citing secondary source. A lot of academic analysis, any sort of history that's written by an academic of something in the distant past or even more recent past is a secondary source itself. So this is a synthesis, where a secondary source synthesizes primary and other secondary source material probably to provide a commentary or an analysis. One thing I will say about this is that for certain projects, it might be really difficult to find good primary sources. And if there aren't very good primary sources out there, there might be few secondary sources as well, which leads to a sort of crisis of how do we even talk about this thing? How do we even write a history of something that might have not been documented well? I won't go too deeply into this, but I will provide a link in the attached document to think about the asymmetry of the archive is one way that this is discussed. So to that, I have a later data point thinking about this asymmetry. First method, we've jumped from thinking about sources overall, primary and secondary sources. Those are going to be everywhere. Here's the first listed method that I've included of archival or artifactual research. So this is the study of documents and ephemera. So correspondence is a term you'll often hear in archives or in special collections, say. Correspondence refers to letters, written conversations, sort of interactions that are written down. Other kinds of archival research might include newspapers, diaries, boardroom minutes, or financial records, etc., as you see here. Most of these sorts of documents that I'm listing would all be under the label of primary sources. The one thing I will say, building the point of the asymmetry of archives, is that it can really present a challenge to one's research process if the things that you've heard mentioned are not represented by some of these sort of primary source documents. And the privilege of a population, of a particular group of people, tends to be reflected in the privilege of archival documentation. Keeping old documents around is expensive. So it can be pretty difficult to talk about groups of people who either had not the interest or did not have the resources otherwise to actually protect those things in perpetuity. So that's something to consider. And perhaps you might need to delve further into a sort of analysis around a topic. Again, I'll provide sources for that. Second method, major method, interviews and surveys. So process of talking to people about their experiences. The one thing I want to note here is that for some projects where you do have human subjects or you're doing human research, you could need IRB approval. Again, I'll link to that below. The idea being that basically you have to explain how you will do no harm or how the research that you are doing is going to be empathetic and careful. This is standard course for STEM research that deals with human subjects. And so, of course, social science research as well. But it's important to know about if you're really relying on people's accounts, say, for work, especially work that would be published or you're hoping to get published. Third, participant observation. So, like I said, more used in fields where, say, being in a classroom setting and observing a teacher working with students, or yourself being a teacher working with students and writing about that experience, or with a group of people. I did some research with like the DIY music scene in Chicago at one point that required, or I decided required, talking to people and sort of attending events and sort of learning the ways of that as a way of considering the social dynamics of those groups. That might be under the auspices of ethnography or participant observation. And then, like I mentioned before, analysis, close reading. You're likely using interpretation throughout. And finally, considering outcomes. So the labels I've thought of for thinking in terms of outcomes are intervention, purpose, and audience. So intervention largely is the research, like it says here, tends to consider and expand upon the production and reception of a thing. So respectively considering how something came to be and how it is thought about. So how it's conceived or made would be the production of the thing, and how it's received or interpreted might be its reception. So the question here is what is the gap in human understanding that you're trying to fill? and how does this new idea you're contributing to the conversation intervene in the discourse or in how we understand through its production or reception. The other side of that is, say, purpose or audience. So these are, frankly, questions that I always found really grim and difficult to answer, especially in my formative developing a thesis project, say, when I was in my undergraduate program. But the big why questions. So why is this research necessary, for instance? Who is it for? It's vital to consider the impact you want to have through any project, but being really purposeful about your audience, about your intent, alongside how it might meet other scholarship, how it answers a question that maybe another scholar has posed, can be really, really important for applying to grants, scholarships, say graduate school level work, or proposing the kind of project that you might do in the future within any of these documents. So key to think about. Hopefully these might be useful questions. So from here, this is the end of the methods section. So tools, here's a little outline, sort of exploring the resources, collecting data, and crafting projects, like I mentioned at the earlier table of contents. This might be a bit of a faster section because I'm just going to point you to a lot of things, and I don't expect you to necessarily pause and immediately search for that thing. I have links to all of the things I'm talking about in the document below on the Office of Fellowships page. Some of these things you will certainly know about already, but hopefully some of them might be new to you. Okay, so a lot of text on the page here. The big thing I'm trying to distinguish is between things at Northwestern versus things elsewhere. So at Northwestern, first and foremost, our libraries, of course, themselves have so many materials, but also there are numerous research librarians that have specialties that match your own disciplines that are available to chat, that you can pick their brains about. Hey, I'm looking for materials about this, or I'm interested in asking or learning about this, and they can guide you to the right resources. So first and foremost, that's a really, really great resource. Also, some of those questions might already be answered in the numerous research guides that have already been produced and live on the website, produced by the research librarians. I give some examples of topics, say Chicago government, Caribbean studies, comparative literature, abolition. Those are already there. They include really specific recommendations for texts, references, different kinds of search engines for scholarly works, etc., all on that topic or used by scholars who are thinking about that topic. Next, interlibrary loan. If you find, or if you've ever found that there's a book, an article, another kind of media like a DVD that you are really keen to see, but our library doesn't have it, you can request it, and it is free to you. Our library has agreements with other libraries locally and further to trade materials back and forth, so they can get that for you. Next are the archives, Northwestern University archives and special collections. Different offices within the library, if you will, but similar in what they are doing. So the archives, it is about Northwestern. So this is the archive of Northwestern materials for use by anyone, basically. So if you're interested in thinking about the legacy of Northwestern, its history, specific events that have happened in its past, whether they be student level events or a particular course taught by a faculty member some number of decades ago, all sorts of materials accessible there that could be really relevant to thinking about those things. Special collections, on the other hand, is not materials about Northwestern, but rather like a museum, it's things that the library system has acquired, whether by gifts, purchases, and people travel internationally, truly, to view things that are held within our special collections. I've given some examples of objects or things that I found evocative that might pique your interest, of Civil War diaries, documents from Chicago Tribune reporters, Nuremberg trial documents, John Cage musical scores. That's a collection that I have used, and that I've worked with scholars or interacted with scholars who have come to Northwestern specifically to use. A lot of really, really cool objects there, and you can go in for free and handle them yourself. Or there are tens of thousands of these documents that have been digitized as well that are available to look through online. In terms of the elsewhere resources, WorldCat I find really important to know about. It is a singular spot where you can search any holding in any library. So anything that has been cataloged, you can read about or you can find references to it on WorldCat. WorldCat can be a really helpful resource to then go to interlibrary loan and say, hey, I found this thing, our library doesn't have it, and you can fill out a form or you can ask for their help to request it that way. Google Scholar, I hope it's well utilized, but in case you have not heard of it, it offers a really, really great utility where, in addition to it being a search engine geared towards peer-edited and scholarly writing, especially, it has two functions that I find fantastic. One, you can search for a particular paper and it will show you which papers have subsequently cited it. So it's sort of a forward work cited, if you will. So if something was published in 1990, maybe there are 50 things that have cited it since then, and Google Scholar will show you that list. So that's incredibly handy if you're trying to find like what's the most updated way, or what are other people that have read this article producing like that are drawing on this material. So I've definitely used it a lot for that. And so you can sort of follow that tree, if you will, a tree of resources that way. The other side of that, which is I guess 2 items down, is the works cited page of any scholarly paper. So you finish something you've read for class, look at the works that are cited in that, and maybe you can plug one of those into Google Scholar, and that can be the rabbit hole towards a really specific niche, a really specific part of something you found compelling within something you read in class, or not. That's your friend and a really, really huge asset. Archives and collection finding aids. So we have our special collections here. We have our archives here. Most other big universities also have special collections and have archives. So perhaps there is a really specific collection that's relevant to a project of yours that is in a holding of another library or a holding of a museum or some sort of other organization. Finding aids are the documents that are produced that explain what is contained within that collection. So I'll include some search tools for how to find relevant collections, how to find relevant finding aids also in the attached document. And maybe a little hokey, but I think really, really true, given what I was talking about this being a research university. Talk to your peers, talk to your professors, look for faculty that are studying things relevant to your interests, maybe even if you haven't taken a course with them, and start a conversation. If you lead with earnestness and like a true desire to want to learn more, can't go wrong. There also are a huge number of different colloquium series that are hosted by especially graduate programs, workshops, other campus events. There's a lot happening. So if you have the energy to sort of key into that and see what's going on and find a couple things, those could be really, really fantastic starting places or continuation places to take a next step into thinking about research broadly. This is the next phase of the tools for research, documenting and collecting. So that was all exploring, learning what's out there. Then what? Number one thing, that reference tools are fantastic and free. What does a reference tool do? Well, you can store and edit bibliographic information. So if you have 100 tabs open on our library and you're trying to like copy and paste things, like no longer. Get Zotero, get EndNote. So Zotero, and this is a screen cap from their website. This is what the interface looks like on OS X operating system. The idea being that you can have folder structures and you can just have individual references within that folder structure. You can also save a PDF, say, of an article or a book within that line item as a way of doing document management as well. The thing that really sells it for me, though, is the plugin for your browser. So there you can just get a plugin and you click a little button that says Save to Zotero, and it immediately captures and scrapes the data from that website. And if you're on our library website, it'll scrape the correct bibliographic data and it will just produce it for you. Then when you go back to this page later on, you've finished writing that paper and you're trying to export the works cited, you can highlight them all and just export to bibliography, and you select Chicago Manual of Style, done, or almost done. You then go through with a fine-tooth comb because it can't get everything right, and maybe a period will be in the wrong place, but it will get you a lot of the way there, and it's a fantastic way of organizing these sorts of documents. So I wish I had known about it sooner. I use it frequently now. An alternative to Zotero is free, as EndNote. EndNote is not typically free. It is quite robust. I have not tried to use it, but through Northwestern, it's a piece of software that you can try. So I've heard good things about that as well if you want to give that a shot. It certainly looks like a prettier interface, if nothing else. Surveying and coordinating software and web apps, so that's software and web apps for surveying and coordinating, can be really great for making meetings or creating forms, creating surveys. So Google Forms you've probably used already, but I just want to give that a shout out. Qualtrics is like a more robust form of surveying software. It is something that you have a free license to as a student. So if you are interested in the qualitative side of producing larger surveys, interpreting a lot more data, or being able to mine that data for quantitatively, definitely check out Qualtrics as an alternative to Google Forms. In terms of coordination, I guess this is really thinking about interviews and things like that. Calendly allows you to set up one where you can just send the person or send a group of people that you're and say, please set up a meeting with me. And you can do that in Highbox as well. And Highbox will allow you to create a variety of kinds of meetings. So you can see this is what I've set up for myself for interviews for my dissertation research. And instead of going through the process of, okay, which days this week are you available? You can say like, here's my availability, and you can populate your own calendar with availability in there, and so that it only shows the correct time slots. When to meet is just a very lightweight way of doing that former thing of finding a common time. I think it's a great utility. It's free. It's online as well. It's much faster to use than SurveyMonkey, I think, and other things like that. Oh, I'm back. Hello. Something I realized recently, or I found recently, is this piece of freeware called Tropy. Now, this is it's like very much I find helpful for archival research organization, that being that you can store images, create folders for them, and then create really robust tags and metadata for each of those documents. So in the example that I pulled from their website here, it's handwritten documents that look quite old. And perhaps you've gone through and taken photos of a bunch of handwritten documents or any sort of object, piece of paper, whatever, and want to leave notes for yourself about it, want to think about how you're going to use this in your research paper. You can do all that. You can do all that sort of text management or your own notations about those things and create tags for them within this sort of system. So I find that really cool and helpful. The audio recorder, camera scanner maybe is obvious, but if you're doing interviews, it's a lifesaver. It could be, and of course, always ask before recording an interview, but that could be really, really handy. And if you're in an archive, or if your archive is walking around Chicago and thinking about pieces of architecture or the soundscape or any number of other things, pulling out a phone or doing an audio recorder and taking notes for yourself can be really, really helpful. As an accessibility note there, I didn't write free next to those because, of course, those are devices you might need to buy if they're not already within your phone. Or you would like a higher quality one. But I want to also flag that our library, like borrowing a book, you can also borrow a camera. You can also borrow recorders of different sorts, and that is much the same operation. So again, I'll link to that below. Crafting. Word processing. You probably already found your word processor of choice, but just as a reminder, or in case you don't already know, you do have access to the whole Microsoft Office 365 suite through Northwestern, as well as a Windows operating system license, if you would like to use that. I've mentioned Scrivener here. I find Scrivener very cool for what it offers, that it is a single, like basically portfolio in which you can create numerous text documents and organize them in file trees. And it's all within the one document, which is, say, in my case, dissertation. And that's just a nice place to store transcripts of interviews, in addition to specific notes that I've taken of a book that's really relevant, and I can put all that in the same place at the same time. There is a cost associated with it, but something to consider perhaps. Editing software for audio and video. I've used Audacity for years. It is a really robust and powerful little tool for audio editing, audio recording. And I've heard really good things about DaVinci Resolve as a free video editing suite as well. For visual presentation, there's so many options out there. I didn't even list PowerPoint, the thing I'm currently using. But Prezi, I know that people are quite fond of Prezi as one option. There was a free slideshow visual interface utility. And then the two others that I've mentioned here are produced by the Night Lab, which actually is connected to Northwestern. One is StoryMap.js, and the other is Timeline.js, both free. And the idea of each is perhaps there's a more compelling way to tell a story using visual data than, say, a slideshow. So these produce really intricate sort of graphics that either foregrounding the time scale in a timeline, or a map in the story map. And you can include text, dates, images, links, other sort of metadata things in order to visually represent a sort of story, or to process for yourself how things might connect in a history maybe you're trying to tell. Okay, this is one of the hard shifts here. So this is to the third section, funding for research. And again, I will flag external is very much Office of Fellowships. That's sort of the end trajectory of why we are talking about the Office of Fellowships here. But all of everything, the things that I've discussed so far, I think are really essential tools, methods, questions that will lead you to projects that will then turn into things that you might try to win national competitions to further fund, whether that further funding might be in the form of independent research, language study towards future endeavors in research, or say tuition support for graduate school. So those are the kinds of things that are under the label of external funding or external grants. But first, internal grants. So again, from Northwestern to Northwestern. Number one I want to flag here is the Office of Undergraduate Research, and then I will go over some department-specific and Northwestern-wide grants as well, so for any Northwestern students. So first, Office of Undergraduate Research. Perhaps you've seen this advertised to you. I will advertise it once more. It is a major turning house and an unusually robust center for you all to get your projects funded and to have workshops, conversations, peer groups, and other sorts of educational experiences that will help you think about research and doing research yourself. That is not done for a grade, that you can, using this office and using its resources, you get to talk to people that are just there to help you make a project that is satisfying and exciting to you and well-researched and can help you win awards, which is, I think, something I like to repeat, that if you're unsure about like how to pursue a particular research topic, you can talk to people there and they will help you find ways to frame that project, because frankly, they want to award you these grants. They want you to produce cool work that they think will, well, I mean, there's always the inside baseball of how will helping you help them in the long term and things in those, but that's just par for the course for any of these things. So vital resource to know about, accessible across disciplines, across programs, and they will fund summer research, school year research, intensive language learning, conference travel, and research assistantships. So I've used some of their graphics on the website here. Again, link below. Briefly go over these: summer undergraduate research grants, the SURGE program, independent academic or creative project. So if you're writing a play, you need to research for that, they got you. Work with them and they will help you find that money, or find and produce the strongest possible application to get that money. Of course, it doesn't need to be a creative project, but it is really cool that is something that they offer as well. Any sort of independent academic endeavor, you're thinking about a history, doing anthropological research, sociological research, it's there. And then once you have earned that, there is an advanced, which is sort of advanced year. And maybe it's a continuation of that project, or maybe it's a new project. If you wish to continue doing research about whatever it is that you're doing research about, you can also come back and they will continue to do that. So that's the summer. There's also the academic year equivalent of that you see mirrors that structure. These are with faculty supervision. There's a robust network of faculty that will also that will work with students that are using the Office of Undergraduate Research. So again, there's that mentorship piece in addition to the other support of teaching you how to do it yourself. Later on, there's one identity specific grant. That's one way that some types of grants are talked about, that if you identify in a particular way, it could be relevant for you. So there's the Emerging Scholars Program, which is a really great program worth considering if this is you, if you feel that it is describing some of what you are or who you are. And then there's a Circumnavigator grant, and this is a once in a lifetime. I think it sounds a little poetic, but I think it's also just like you can get this grant once in your time at Northwestern. It's a lot of money to travel around and do cool research. So that is maybe more of a reach goal. You do the earlier research, you do one or two of these sorts of programs, and then that gets you to a place where you can apply and maybe get that as well. That doesn't need to work in that sort of linear way, but certainly having earlier research experiences under your belt helps. Other things that they will support include the UREP program, which is quite cool. The idea being that you might say, hey, Professor so-and-so, I see that you're doing great research on this, or I'm wondering if you're working on a project right now. I'd love to learn from you. I'd love to participate. Outside of STEM, there is not a lot of money within departments or at the discretion of individual faculty members. Therefore, the UREP program has come to be. The idea being that the OUR will work with you and that faculty member and will pay you to be that research assistant. It's a really cool thing. If there is intensive summer language study that is relevant to either you need to acquire the language quickly for the research that you seek to do, and or you wish to study a language that's not offered or not offered at a high enough level for you at Northwestern, ULG is a really good program. It's one I've been on the review committee for, so I've helped decide who got those grants, which was a cool experience. And then conference travel grants as well, that if you are trying to attend conferences, there is some money through this office as well for that. This is an abbreviated list, and I'm sorry for the wall of text, but here are some options. There are a variety of department-specific or Northwestern-wide programs, fellowships, specifically to support research. I've listed a number in Weinberg here. You can see for using the first is for funding. If you are doing research using the Africana collection, the next is specifically for students from underrepresented groups, research on environmental issues, research on Asia-related topics, research on public health, excuse me. Media arts grant, especially for creative media projects, if you happen to be in one of those programs, an RTVF program, funding for research for CESP students as well, if you happen to be in that school. And then these are a variety of Northwestern-wide ones that you might consider at some point during your time here. The two at the bottom there are a little bit different, though still Northwestern-wide. There's the one form, which is offered through the Student Enrichment Services Office, which is a funding finding aid tool, basically, that includes some of the things listed here, and then a few other things. And one of the things that is offered by or controlled by the Student Enrichment Services Office is also the emergency aid request. This is not research funding. I just like to share about it because I think it's important to know that those resources exist as well. But check out the one form to learn, and check out Student Enrichment Services if you have thoughts and questions about that. And finally, external funding. This is where the Office of Fellowships steps in here. The staff of the Office of Fellowships are on salary. They are ready and willing to help you craft your applications for grants and fellowships, scholarships offered by organizations and institutions outside of Northwestern. So this is kind of a one-stop shop. These are the people in the Office of Fellowships can help you find the relevant grants and funding for you, given your own professional and academic aspirations. They can help you craft the materials for these applications, thinking in terms of the storytelling, the autobiographical storytelling, and thinking about your goals and how you might elucidate that within your application materials, and prepare for interviews and all the other sort of minutiae that come with these national, international, national competitions. So I've listed a few here, starting with the Fulbright U.S. Student Program as one that can specifically support independent research, placing you somewhere in the world. The others here, this is a very partial list, and I try to cherry pick some that are specifically towards research funding, whether that be for an independent project or tuition support, where in graduate school, say, you would be doing more research of some sort. The Soros Justice Fellowships, funding for projects that advance reform, spur debate, and catalyze change on a range of issues facing the U.S. criminal justice system. If that's interesting, if that seems relevant to you, talk to someone in the Office of Fellowships about it, and they can help you learn more. The next is graduate school tuition support for new Americans, followed by tuition support for first-generation and low-income students, funding for study of languages less commonly taught. And then I sort of have a list of others. Mitchell, Marshall, Rhodes, Gates. A number of these can specifically support tuition in a variety of universities in the UK. So again, sort of research in graduate school. I want to not discourage, but to say that these are sort of arrival points. These are things that you should be thinking about, say, junior year into your senior year, for the most part. That would be things that you approach with a great portfolio of other things that you have done. So starting in the Office of Undergraduate Research, especially, I think that is a great turning house for learning how to do research, for gaining those first experiences, and then with that, or hand in hand with that, beginning to look for things that are more discipline specific. There's a whole host of other external funding, little smaller competitions, say through the conferences and societies that are specific to a discipline. Say the Society of American Music offers a host of different types of grants, and some of those larger organizations will offer grants specifically to undergraduates as well. So learning about those things through your department, plus the Office of Undergraduate Research, plus Northwestern internal funding, some of the Weinberg specific things, for instance, or specific to your department. And then having built up that portfolio, having started a relationship, an advising relationship with someone in the Office of Fellowships, you can sort of have this arrival point where like, okay, it's time to apply to the Fulbright U.S. student program. And you could be very informed about what that's going to take at that point. So think about these as sort of arrival points, but it's never too early to begin that conversation and to express your interest. You can set up your own intake interview, if you will, and reach out to the Office of Fellowships email address, which I'll have here. But I just want to give one plug to Immigrants Rising, this image that you've seen here. If you are an international student, if you're here on a student visa, some of these types of things will not be accessible to you, these national competitions. However, there are a variety of things that are available to you, but it might just take the guidance of an advisor in the Office of Fellowships and your own a little bit of time looking through a job board like that of Immigrants Rising, which collects grants, funding specifically targeted at or specifically available to undocumented international people here on visas to study or for other reasons. So rest assured, there's also that resource. It's, of course, a useful one for anyone, but there is a little bit of a disparity there. So in terms of what might be accessible. So just wanted to note that as a resource. And that's it. Thank you for listening through. I hope this was helpful in one or two ways or more. Please reach out to the fellowships@northwestern.edu email address if you have particular questions or if you want to set up a meeting. Again, lots of links in the document below. I am also available to answer questions, and I'll put an email address for me within that document as well. If you have questions about things within this presentation that I talked about. Thank you so much.